Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you here. It's 6 o'clock. We're going to get started in like a couple minutes. Just wait for a few more folks to trickle in. Welcome, those of you who are joining us. Happy to have you here. We are just going to wait for a few more folks to come. So, a couple more minutes and we'll get started. All right, we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay. So, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to have you here. Today's webinar is called Beyond Ourselves, Nurturing Empathy and Respect in Children. So, let's get started. I'd love to know a little bit about who's in the Zoom room. If you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to introduce yourself, let me know where you're Zooming from, how old are the children that you work with, or maybe your students, or the children you have at home or child you have at home. And I'm just wondering, what is one hope that you have for this webinar? So I'd love to know what brought you here tonight. So I know some of us also, like we might be on cell phones and it might be hard to plug into the chat. That's totally fine. If you're able to respond, I'd love to hear from you and we'll take, maybe another minute to share. So welcome for those who are just coming. We're just settling in here. I would love to know who's in the room with me tonight. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself briefly, where you might be zooming in from, how old are your children or how old is your child, and what is one hope you have for this webinar? What brings you here tonight? I'll wait maybe another 30 seconds. And again, it's totally fine if you're doing something else or you're on your cell phone and it's hard to type into the chat. No worries at all. Okay, so it's okay. We're just going to keep moving on here. Hopefully, we'll be able to use the chat a little later. But I'm going to keep moving forward and introducing myself. Oh, Jenny, thank you for thank you for chiming in. So Jenny from Western Massachusetts. Oh, wow. So you're way up north there, helping raise a 4-year-old, hoping to learn how to encourage empathy in very young children. Jenny, you've come to the right spot. Thank you so much for joining. And let's get started with our webinar. So just a little bit about me. My name is Erica Brenton. I've been an educator for over 20 years now, and I started my career as a New York City public school teacher. I then saw how social emotional learning impacted my students in my classroom, and I became a real fan of social emotional learning, so I became a specialist. And right now, I live in Montclair, New Jersey, with my husband and my two children who are in middle and elementary school. And we just got a little puppy, so he's very much a part of our family now. And when I have any kind of free time, I like to go on long walks and read and spend time with my family. So I'm happy to be here with you this evening. So by the end of today, I'm hoping these are some of the things that you'll walk away with so that we'll be able to define empathy. So, what does empathy even mean? We'll share why it's important. So, what's some of the research showing about why empathy is important? We'll look developmentally at different age groups and how empathy develops through the ages. We'll talk about some of the ways that some of the things that actually get in the way of children being empathetic. So, what are some of those blocks? And those are the things that we can certainly work with. We'll learn some strategies for building empathy in the home. We'll talk about support for children with special needs, and then we'll talk through some common challenges. So, what are some of the things that come up around empathy? And then we'll do some troubleshooting around that as well. So I like to set the foundation with a quote, just kind of grounds us in the work and really grounds us in the importance of this work. So I love this quote. It's by Atticus Finch in the book To Kill a Mockingbird, which is a book I loved and read in high school and then read again as an adult. And it says, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you can climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. So really that is our foundation today, is how we develop this sense of climbing into someone else's skin and walking around in it. So what is empathy? There's lots of definitions, but I've come up or presented you with a simple one here. So empathy is an awareness of the feelings and emotions of other people. So it's different than sympathy. Sympathy is when we feel for somebody, we see somebody going through a hard time, or we feel for them. But empathy is really feeling with someone. And I have this image here of these two minds sort of connecting because there's a component of the brain called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are the things in our brain that really help us to develop empathy. So every time we observe another person experiencing an emotion, the mirror cells activate and they set off the same emotional circuits in our brain. So that's why, for example, we get scared at movies, or if we're watching a violent video game, we can feel like we have that sense of aggression. Or even if we see somebody else smile, it can make us feel good. It can make us feel happy. So um, that's a quick definition of empathy and sort of what happens in the circuits of our brains and how we develop that sense of empathy. And there's three types of empathy that I'm going to talk about tonight. So there's cognitive empathy, and so that's sometimes called perspective taking, and it's the ability to identify and understand the emotions in others. Then we have affective empathy, so that refers to the feelings that we get in response to other people's emotions. And then we have compassionate empathy. And empathy is when we actually feel compelled to do something as the result of our shared feelings with somebody else. So, it's kind of more simplistically, the head is the intellectual part of understanding empathy, what it is and what it does. The heart feels what others are feeling, and the hand actually takes the action after feeling empathy for somebody. So these are the three types of empathy that we're going to be referring to this evening. So what are some of the benefits of having empathy? So we know that empathy is something that feels good, is something that we know is important for kids. We know it's important for adults. But what are some of the research-based benefits of having empathy? Well, empathy builds stronger friendships and community. It reduces bullying and conflict and helps with teamwork, leadership, and academic collaboration. So there's actually research out there that shows that children's ability to recognize emotions in others and to take others' perspectives is very much associated with social competence, peer acceptance, self-control, and actually academic performance. So having empathy is not only wonderful in social situations, but it also actually boosts academic performance, which I thought was really fascinating. And a meta-analysis of empathy in adolescents showed that higher empathy, especially that affective empathy that we just talked about, actually predicts bystander defending in bullying situations. So it predicts how well we stand up for others. So it's such a rich quality to have that it not only helps us to feel good with other people, but it really helps our life outcomes as well and children's life outcomes as well. So I have a very quick video for you here, and I think maybe just by looking at it, you'll recognize that it's from Sesame Street. So bear with me while we watch it because there's a point in watching a children's video. So give me just one sec. I'm going to toggle my screen here. And we're going to watch this quick video. While you watch it, maybe just think about why did I put this, in our webinar tonight? What was the purpose of it? And I hopefully you'll enjoy it a little bit too and think it's, sweet and amusing. So let me just put it on full screen and get started. It's only two. Okay.
Can you stop moving?
Okay, so I'm going to actually share this video link in the chat because I think it's a really nice one, not only for adults. I thought that that was amusing, but also for kids. Let me just put that quickly in the chat for you if you want to share that with one of your sweet children at home. But any just like initial reactions before I share my opinion about the video and why I chose it? I'll just hold the chat open for, a 30 seconds or something. But any reactions, any initial reactions to the video? Again, I know some of you might be on your cell phones, so no worries if it's hard to enter into the chat. So maybe what I'll do is I'll actually share the reason why I did choose this video. And then if you want to also put in your impressions, I'd love to hear from you. Oh my gosh, Sue, exactly. Thank you for naming what I was going for. Sue said it's good. It's hard to explain empathy to kids. And I think that that's right. The reason I chose this video is because it is really hard to explain empathy to kids. And it's hard for them to really understand what that means, especially younger children. And so the idea would be that we have empathy for children who aren't really necessarily getting it or who are grappling with it or who are having a hard time understanding it because it's really a skill that needs to be taught. I mean, some children are born with very empathetic kind of feelings and go about life, showing empathy to everyone they see. But more often than not, it's a skill that we really, as adults, need to teach kids. So that's really why I liked this video. So Sue, thank you for chiming in on that. And hopefully the video link is something that will help you too. So just out of curiosity, the children that you have at home, either you have a child or children, or maybe you're working with children, but I'm just curious, how do your children show empathy? So maybe what's something for you that comes up where you're like, wow, I can see my child showing empathy. I'll just give a small example for myself if you want to enter your examples into the chat, I'd love to hear from you. But sometimes I actually find that my children, I struggle to find ways that they show empathy. But we recently, as I mentioned in my intro, got a puppy. And it's been really fascinating to see them interact with this puppy because they have more empathy or the way that they're able to show empathy for the dog is very different than the way that they're showing empathy for people. And so it's been a really nice example for me to say, okay, they're worried about the dog if he's, sleeping too much, or they want to make sure he's eating enough, or they want to make sure that he is, feeling playful and frisky. So that's just an example for me. Lanisha, thank you so much for writing into the chat. So please feel free to send over your own examples. I recently had surgery and my son asked me how I was doing and if I was better and gave me a hug. And that's such a beautiful way of showing empathy. And I imagine that made you feel really good, Lanisha. Thank you for sharing that. Any other examples? Please feel free to write in. I'll hold the chat space for about 30, 45 seconds. Okay. Well, maybe if you can't write into the chat, maybe just it's like a good food for thought. So just thinking about maybe some of the ways, and it could be really small ways, it could be gestures, it could be ways that you're observing them with friends or with family members, or it could be really big ways. So just a food for thought, thinking about the children you work with or the children you have at home or child you have at home. How do they show empathy? Oh, sorry. You know what? I'm just going to go back because I think Berenice, I think I pronounced your name all right, and I'm sorry if I didn't. Um, so sometimes the children worry when the other is looking for something they can't find and help to no, it's okay. They help each other. That's such a wonderful example. So that sense of worry, that sense of really advocating and making sure that they can help each other. That's a wonderful example. Oh, excuse me, example. Thank you so much for chiming in, Berenice. And again, if you want to keep adding in, well, I'll keep floating back to the chat here. But what I wanted to do is take us through a bit of a developmental lens of how empathy develops through the ages. And I think that this is nice because it helps us to understand, what can we expect from a young child, early childhood ages 3 to 6, that's different than a teenager. What can we expect from a child who's in the middle school, and are our expectations too high or maybe our children are meeting our expectations. So again, this is also like this is not necessarily like exactly the way it looks for every child. I want to make sure I recognize that sometimes, this is not the exact fit for an elementary schooler or high schooler, but it's just a sort of a typical developmental lens. So we have early childhood, and that's ages 3 to 6. And so here that they're really recognizing others' emotions. And so as we spoke about with the three types of empathy, it's much more effective. So it's much more of that emotional kind of empathy and not necessarily thinking about it. So it's not the cognitive part. So what it might look like is maybe noticing when someone is sad or hurt and what to do with children that age. So what's a really good practice is just naming feelings out loud. So you might say something like, I'm feeling really happy because I'm eating dinner with you and it's so nice to spend time with you. Or you look really angry and I can understand why you're angry because that boy just took your toy. So the idea would be that we would name our own emotions out loud and that we would encourage and name their emotions out loud and really, really develop that emotional literacy and that emotional vocabulary. And so then we have children in elementary school ages around 7 to 10. And so this is where they're really able to think more about perspective taking. So it's taking something from somebody else's perspective. Also, fairness comes into play a lot here. They might be aware of who's being included, who's being excluded. And so, making sure that like, are kids following by the rules? Are they not following by the rules? And this is really where we begin to see children advocating for others. So Berenice, I'm not sure how old the children are that you have at home, but it sounds like they're advocating already. Not sure if they're in the elementary school age. Oh, 9 and 7. So actually perfect. It's exactly when they start to begin to advocate for others. Um, and so something that's really nice to do is really modeling empathy in family situations. So you might say something, to your child like, I can understand how you would feel so upset because your show is ending, and that can feel really hard when our show is ending. Or, maybe if you have siblings who are fighting with each other, like, gosh, it must be really hard to be engaged in this fight right now because fighting never feels good. So really modeling how that works in a family unit. Um, and then we come to middle school, so ages 11 to 13. And this is where that cognitive empathy really can deepen. So, really understanding what empathy looks like, what it doesn't look like, how to empathize with somebody when someone is not empathizing with you. So, really, like that intellectual piece comes into play. But on the other side of things, kids in middle school really can succumb to peer pressure. They also can succumb to insecurity. And so those two things, and we'll get into that more in a moment. But those two things can sometimes limit empathetic behavior. So you might see actually elementary school kids demonstrating much more empathy than our middle schoolers who are even older, but it's because of that social pressure that comes into play. And so the empathy may show more privately than publicly. I'm noticing that definitely with my middle schooler who shows a lot of empathy at home, particularly with our dog right now, with our puppy, which I'm so glad to see, but he may not do that in a public situation. And sometimes that really bothers me, but then when I think about it developmentally, I realize that it's actually quite normal. And so something really nice here would be that you could do with middle school age children is role play. And you can role play perspective taking. So, let's say that you're, on a soccer team and some kid, talks nasty to you or pushes you or something like that. Like, you know, what would you do or what would you say or how would you feel and like what could be going on for that other person? So, really talking through like common scenarios that might come up and then really putting yourself in the shoes of that other person and helping them to put themselves in the shoes of the other person. I mentioned soccer just because soccer is a big um, sport in our family, but anything that comes up for you that feels relevant is would be really helpful and important. And so then we come to high school, and high school is, much more of that cognitive and all three of those types of empathy really working together. And so kids are seeing things a lot from multiple viewpoints. They can reflect and really understand more social issues, and they're really developing their identity and their values. And so empathy can become very integrated within that. So this is where we see kids becoming more aware and more concerned for global and social issues. And this is where also, and it sounds like Berenice, this is happening for you in elementary, but this is also where, more complicated kind of social situations come into play. And you can really see kids supporting their friends through all different kinds of issues. So it's really that peer kind of empathy. And so something really nice to do with high school kids is to think about what kind of, community kind of engagement can they be involved in? How can they advocate for the things that they really believe in, issues that they really care about? Maybe there are services they can offer. And so that can happen really at any age, but I think, the idea here would be that it would really resonate with high school kids, and they could take it to that next level. Okay, I'm going to move on, but if there's any questions along the way or anybody has anything else to add to this list, I like to believe that I have a lot of information to share, but there's a lot of information and wisdom in this Zoom room here. So anything that I left out or any questions or anything like that, please put it in the chat and I'll be monitoring it. But I'm going to move on here. So, what gets in the way of empathy? And so we have like our normal developmental factors, which I just talked about, right? So, most likely, we're not going to see a 3-year-old wanting to volunteer at an animal shelter. Maybe a middle schooler is not showing empathy because they have that social, peer pressure. So, there's all these developmental factors, normal developmental factors that can prevent children from feeling empathetic. Then we have, an emotional overload or stress. And I think as adults, we can really understand this, right? Like when we're feeling stressed, when we're feeling an abundance of emotions, it's really hard for ourselves to put ourselves in the shoes of others. And so that happens a lot for kids too. If they're feeling, heavy emotions, if they're feeling stressed, it can be really hard for them to empathize with others. So understanding that factor. Of course, there's social pressures. So, it might not be cool to, show empathy for others. Like in that middle school age, maybe, you want to be with the in group, and maybe there's kids who are in and who are out. And that's definitely not an excuse and definitely not something that we want to condone. But there's social pressures out there, and it's just good to be aware of what kind of influences is your child's receiving? Are they in a group of friends who maybe are like positively supporting, empathy and respect and being an upstanding, citizen and a bystander? Or are they somebody who are really falling under some negative social pressures? So just being aware of that, I think, is important. This next one, mixed messages. I think mixed messages happen all the time. I will say, like, I am somebody who definitely is sending mixed messages to my own children because I think oftentimes I'm somebody who really is very engaged in my community, and I tend to do a lot of service work and show a lot of empathy in that way. But I could also maybe not be so empathetic at home. Like if my kids are struggling or having a hard time, I think sometimes my quick reaction is just to get annoyed or get frustrated or not understand why they're not acting the way I want them to act. And so that's a mixed message, right? It's like I'm empathetic in this situation, but not in this situation. So being aware of the way that we're portraying ourselves can be really, really helpful as well. And then we have digital and media influences. So, what kind of social spaces are your kids hanging out with? Are they in environments where, um, there's positive digital and media influences, or are there, messages that are coming across it? You have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to be a certain way, and uphold yourself to these standards. And so that can really affect how we empathize with others because we think there's kind of one way of being or one right way of being. And then finally, cultural messages about success. So sometimes families, encourage, an attitude of like it's about the individual, it's not about the collective, right? And so that can really influence a child to say, well, I'm the most important, or winning is the most important, or achievement is the most important. So we want to think about, some of those cultural messages that our children are getting. So I just want to make sure that I'm highlighting too children with special needs because, you know, it may not be a typical kind of development as we saw in that lens. But it's really important that we understand maybe what we might misinterpret and also how we can support children who are neurodivergent. So something that we might misinterpret, and to be totally honest, this could be something if your child has a special need or not, because I often think these things about my own children. Um, but anyway, he just doesn't care, right? Like he doesn't care about other people. He only cares about himself. It could be more likely that he's overwhelmed or maybe he's unsure of showing how to care. He needs to be taught those skills. Or she never asks how others feel. She's kind of just focused on herself and she's not worried about how anyone else feels. Well, she may not necessarily notice that this is a cue that she's supposed to, and it's not necessarily that she's selfish, but she needs to be taught that cue, right? It's socially polite to ask how others are feeling. But that may not be something she was ever taught. He's blunt, so some kids are just super direct. It doesn't necessarily mean they have a lack of empathy. It just means that they have a direct style of communication and maybe they show empathy in other ways. And then finally, she only focuses on herself. So, um, I think this is something that I think about a lot is many neurodivergent children really need extra regulation time and they need very explicit teaching. So sometimes, just like we talked about that stress and emotional overload, when we're just focused on ourselves and all the things we're going to through, we first need to get regulated, right? We need to like take care of our own needs before we can really focus on somebody else's needs. So, really helping them to regulate themselves and also offering these very, very explicit teaching social cues and other kinds of emotional cues. And so how can we support children, neurodivergent children? So we want to think about using very clear, concise language. So, when we talked about emotions earlier, like this is anger. Anger feels this way, and you look angry, or, let's ask her how she's feeling. So just very, very clear language. We want to think about teaching perspective taking explicitly. So, um, you know, how can you see something from somebody else's point of view? So you could use stories, you could use movies, you could say, how do you think she was feeling? How do you think he was feeling? What do you think that they could do differently? So really like using almost like the things that we engage with and with our children, whatever it is, in social situations, media, TV, books, and really, really highlighting that perspective taking. And then again, prioritizing regulation first. So, how can we get in a good spot within ourselves before we can help and empathize with others? Celebrating alternative ways of showing empathy. So, maybe empathy looks really different for your child. Maybe empathy looks like, you know, creating space for silence. Maybe empathy looks like a gesture. Maybe empathy looks like just a word. And so, really thinking about how we can celebrate all different ways of showing empathy and not just ways that we necessarily believe they should be. And then, of course, very importantly, collaborating with school teams and not only school teams, but family members, friends, anybody that can really help us to really support our child and really support ourselves in this work. So I highly encourage that. Okay, I've been doing a lot of talking here. So I actually was curious to hear, and again, if you can't enter your thoughts into the chat box, that's okay. Um, Maybe just thinking about it, but modeling is one of the most, and just as we saw from the previous slides, is one of the most effective ways of teaching empathy to kids. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what is one way that you model empathy? And it could be intentional, right? Like one of the things I do to model empathy is I show my kids that it's important to do service work. So it's important to help take care of others in our community. So that's intentional, but maybe unintentionally, I model empathy by, you know, taking care of them and loving them and teaching them about feelings or something like that. So just curious from your perspective, what's one way that you model empathy? And again, it could be intentional or unintentional. And if you feel like jotting or putting your thoughts into the chat box, I'd love to know. Um, okay, Sue, thanks for starting us off here. So I try to model it by myself by saying hello to others and seeing if others need help, holding doors, etc. So really showing those social norms of greeting people, asking for help, holding, being respectful and kind by holding doors. Thank you so much, Sue. Um, I think Talia, I think I'm pronouncing your name right. If I'm not, I'm so sorry. Um, this is such a wonderful idea. I share aloud questions like I wonder how that made them feel. Oh, good. I'm glad I pronounced your name right. When they tell me things about others. So that's that perspective taking, really like putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else. So that's a wonderful way of modeling, and it sounds like that's intentional. Any other ideas, other ways that we model empathy? Um, I'll just hold the chat room open for another 20, 30 seconds. And again, it's okay if Berenice, intentionally we teach children what's the right choice to make around others. So that sounds like it's a very intentional, these are the right choices to make. And that sounds like the children you have are very lucky to help you teach them or help have you teach them how to do that. Um, and Jenny, we talk about how their behaviors make us feel in front of the kid and ask him what he thinks, right? So really bringing up those ideas of feelings. We all have feelings. We all have sometimes multiple feelings at the same time. And really trying to understand that, we're all operating in the same way. Thank you all so much for your thoughts and ideas. Really helpful. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to our own families here and just a couple of ideas. And again, if you have an idea that you think would be helpful for the group, like please feel free to enter it into the chat box. I'd love to hear from you. Um, but here's some of the ideas that I came up with based on my own family and some of the things that we do. So the first one is just expanding their worldview. Again, there's a lot of like news out there that isn't really appropriate for kids. So we invest in something, it's like a magazine for kids. It's called The Week Junior, and it's all about current events for kids that is very appropriate. I just put it into the chat box. So current events will come weekly. And it's in very appropriate ways of explaining it to kids so they can understand what's happening in the world, right? It's not just about this little town we live in or the street we live on. And maybe it's not appropriate for those like little guys. But as they get more into elementary school, middle school, high school, it's definitely appropriate to introduce them to more world views. And if anybody has any other ideas of how they do that, please feel free to put that in. So then we have create family agreements that model respect. So this could be like an agreement. It could be, we have something in our family called core values. And these are values that we've all agreed upon that we like to live by. A couple of them are communication, responsibility, thoughtfulness. Um, and so we try to make sure that we model these for them and that we also live by them, right? So if someone is being disrespectful or irresponsible, we'll say, well, those really aren't our family values. And it's been very powerful to do these actually alongside with the kids so that they have that kind of buy-in and that they know that this is like our family culture. And if somebody isn't living by one of the agreements that we've created, that we can say, our values are X, Y, and Z, and we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about that. Oh, Berenice, sharing social stories. Yes, that's wonderful. So do you do that at the dinner table? Do you just do that as it comes up? Is there a formal way that you do that? I'd be curious to hear about that. Um, and maybe you can enter that in while I move on to this next one here. And so a lot of you had mentioned that you really talk a lot about feelings. And so I think it's really important to talk about feelings not just during conflicts, but all the time, right? Because we're kind of all walking around with feelings all the time. And it's just so helpful for kids to know that. I use something called the rose, the bud, and the thorn. We talk about this at dinner. The rose is something that's going really well in our lives or something that went really well in our day. The bud is something like an opportunity or something we're looking forward to. And the thorn is something that didn't go so great, like something that was challenging or hard. And so the kids have come to expect uh, this structure where they really feel open to talking about things that are feeling really good and positive for them and then feeling really challenging. So you might think about something that you can incorporate into your own dinner conversations. Or Berenice said, we talk about it right every night before bed. So that's a really awesome time to do that too. Any way to make a ritual out of it. And then teaching repair, not perfection. So there's no way we're going to walk around with kids who are like positively, expressing empathy all the time or really doing the right thing all the time. And we don't do that as adults. But the idea would be that instead of expecting perfection and instead of expecting our kids to do the right thing all the time, that we really focus on repair. Um, and when we model that, it could be a very, very powerful model of empathy. So I'll just give an example that, sometimes when I'm like short with my kids, let's say they don't finish their homework and they just go off and watch TV, and I just get very frustrated. And I'll just say, like, it's every day we do this, and this is, why do you guys do this all the time? And it's so frustrating to me, and you're not thinking about your whatever it is I do. Um, and then I have to stand back and say, like, okay, they're not perfect, and I'm not perfect, and they're just excited to watch TV because they probably had really long days at school. And so oftentimes I'll just go into the room and I'll say, like, I'm sorry for shouting. I'm feeling frustrated because I need to make sure your homework is done. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell, and I can understand how that would make you feel, upset or hurt. So we can model, like, how do we repair? How do we make sure that kids can make mistakes and we can make mistakes? Because that really builds that sense of empathy, right? That I'm modeling that and they're feeling that. And then finally, celebrating kindness the way we celebrate achievement. So I love this one. You can do lots of things with this. You could have a kindness jar, and every time your child or you does an act of kindness, you put it in the jar. And then maybe at the end of the week or at the end of the month, you look at all the acts of kindness and maybe you celebrate. If you get like 10 or 20 or something like that, you get like an ice cream party. There's also these really nice things you can do, like a monthly act of kindness. So, like once a week, maybe you and your family do an act of kindness together. Or it could be like every day of the month if your kids are a little older, and then you have a celebration at the end. But the idea would be that we, just as we would if our child comes home with a really fantastic grade, we also want to celebrate, um, really fantastic acts of kindness. So, yeah, anything that resonated for you, I'd love to hear. Sometimes I like to share, and sometimes I feel like I'm talking too much. So, I'm going to move on here, but I'd love to know if any of these resonated for you. Anything you might want to try at home, would be fantastic. So I'll hold the chat room for like 30 seconds, but anything that came up for you while I was sharing some of these ways of building a family culture around empathy. Oh, Berenice, thank you for chiming in. Okay, I would love to try the talking about feelings regularly. Yeah. I also find, Berenice, that sometimes it's hard to talk about feelings, regularly, just because sometimes it's hard for us to even know like what we're feeling at a given time. So having this structure, this rosebud thorn is really helpful because it offers us like something that we could all, look to sort of help and support us talking about those feelings. Um, there's also this really nice, yeah, the structure is really nice. There's also this really nice thing that you could use as a family. It's called a mood meter, and you can just get it on your, in your app store on your phone. But it's ways that kids can sort of show what they're feeling by selecting like a certain color, and it can like bring up like an image or like a word that they're feeling, and then you can talk about that feeling because sometimes it is hard for them to know. So using something like a mood meter is also really, really helpful. I encourage you to look into that as well. Okay. So, for the remaining time that we're together, I'm just going to go over some common challenges and troubleshooting because despite our best, I put it into the chat, Berenice. It's called the mood meter. I'll put it in again. But and there's a few different ones, but it's a really nice way of helping kids to identify what they're feeling in a very age appropriate way. And so I'm going to go through some common challenges in troubleshooting because despite our best efforts at trying to get our kids to do, read the newspaper and talk about feelings and all the things like kids are kids, right? And humans are humans, and there's going to be challenges that come up. So I just picked a few common challenges and ones that I've seen both in my family and just with folks that I know. And then I'm going to share with you some ways that you might be able to troubleshoot some of those challenges. So, yeah, so let's get started. So, let's say you have a middle school child and they come from school and they just have a habit of speaking poorly about other children, right? It's not something that you do, but they do. They like to call people names. They're making fun of the way they look. You've let them know that this isn't a nice way of talking about other people, but the behavior persists. So you've already tried to address it, like we don't talk about people like that, or that's not nice, but it just kind of keeps happening. Um, so let's look at why that's happening and then what you might be able to do about that. So why might it be happening? Well, if they're in middle school, most likely, like we talked about, there's like this social pressure trying to fit in. Maybe they're copying their peers. Maybe it's something they're hearing at school and they think it's cool. Maybe they're offloading stress after school. So just like a way of just kind of, they're holding everything together during the day. And maybe that's just a way that they need to release at the end of the day. Not excusing them for it, but just a possible rationale. And then in that moment, right, like maybe they have limited perspective taking. Maybe just in that moment, they're just like not thinking about anything else but themselves. And so, how can we get them to shift from being that sort of like self-involved to thinking about others? And so, our response really is not going to be punitive or shouldn't be punitive. It shouldn't be blaming or judging. I mean, we could be thinking that inside, but really what we want to do is just like get curious. Like, why does my child keep doing this behavior? And we can also explore feelings. So, like, what might they be feeling? Like somebody who's sort of sharing this information about other people, and maybe they're not feeling so great inside, right? So we can explore feelings there. And then from there, we can kind of build that perspective taking, right? We can say like, well, how might that child have felt? Or like, how might you be feeling if someone said that to you? And then we really want to set an appropriate boundary, right? Because we don't want them to continue with this behavior. And maybe we give them an alternative of something else they could do. So a quick possible thing you could say in this kind of situation is, like, tell me what happened. Like, what's been happening for you at school? Maybe something happened today. Oh, that sounds really frustrating, right? Like, we're going to explore some feelings around there. Well, how might that other child have felt? Like, I know you feel really frustrated. I know you feel really upset and angry. Like, how might, and I think one of you actually had mentioned, maybe it was Jenny, had mentioned that uh, oh, right. Sorry, Talia had mentioned, how it sounds like you're already doing this. Like, well, how might that other person have felt? And then just sharing, like, I'm here to listen to you. I'm here for you. I love you. But we also don't talk about people and their appearances. So we want to be kind and firm. We want to accept their feeling, accept the situation that's happening, but also to create a boundary to say, this is actually not something we're going to continue to do. We can talk about other things like feelings or situations, but we're not going to talk about people's appearances. Um, so that's a possible script that you could use and a possible way of responding to this kind of behavior if that is coming up for you. Okay, and now we have a child who you feel like your elementary school child only thinks about themselves. They could be younger, they could be older. They often express things like, I want a cookie or I want to watch TV. And they really don't often use manners or they don't really express appreciation for all the things that you're doing. So let's see, what could be going on for them? What's a possible way to respond? And then just sharing with you a quick script that you could use. So again, this is looking at our elementary school students, this is very like developmentally normal. And so a lot of kids at this age are very like impulse driven. And so we see this with sort of the younger kids. They may not, this is this explicit teaching part. Like they may not know how to ask respectfully, or they may not know how to empathize, right? Like we saw in the Sesame Street video, sometimes kids need to be taught very explicitly how to do things. So may just not know. I think this one was really interesting. The split families often meet needs quickly and unintentionally reinforce those direct demands. I do this all the time. So my kids will demand something of me. I'm just in the moment, I'm feeling crazed, I'm feeling a little stressed, and I'll just do it for them, right? And so it just takes some of the complication and the conflict out of it and saves me some time. But I think what I'm doing is actually negatively reinforcing that they're just demanding something for me and I'm supplying it for them. So, just building in a little bit of awareness, is that something that you feel like you're doing when your child demands something? Are you catering to them? Unintentionally or intentionally. And ultimately, kids just express wants more than they express appreciation or manners, especially young kids. And so it's a very developmentally normal. And so what could we do? So again, we don't want to punish or, show judgment or anger. I mean, we can feel those things, angry and judgy and frustrated, but to show them that we're being empathetic towards them, we can stay neutral. We can reflect what they need. Okay, I heard that you want a cookie. I hear that you want to watch TV. You can then model the language you want to hear, right? So like I'd actually appreciate it if you would say, can I please have another cookie? I know that you're, working hard in the kitchen right now, but do you mind getting me that or something like that? Because that really teaches like other people's needs and other people's efforts. And we want to build that in even when they're really young and too young to understand. It's something that they can see as they get older if we constantly reinforce it. And so then we want to reinforce that respectful asking. So we might say something like, I really hear that you want that cookie. Um, I need you to try to ask in a kind way. You can even give them what it would sound like in a kind way. Like, I want you to say like I would like a cookie, please, or I notice you're in the kitchen and you're very busy. Would you mind getting me a cookie? So we want to give them that language. And then praise if they're able to say what we want them to say, really praising them. So like that was a lot more respectful. Thank you so much. and just teaching them like I'm more likely to say yes to you if you use really good manners. So again, we're explicit, we're not judging, we're being open, we're explicitly teaching, and then we're reinforcing the positive. And again, as I go along, if you feel that there's something else that you would do in these situations, please feel free to chime into the chat. Oh, Berenice, you had mentioned, yeah, we cater to our kids unintentionally all the time. It is unintentional, but we can really reinforce that behavior. So thank you for chiming in. And then we have our final scenario here. So this is maybe when our kids are a little older and we're just really noticing that they're just very invested in themselves. They're not really thinking outside themselves. Other children you're hearing are maybe volunteering for community organizations or they're doing advocacy groups or they're doing things that really make a difference. But your child is really, kind of doing their own thing and just playing sports, hanging out with their friends, and you want more from them. So why might this be happening? So even though our these children are older, being self-involved is actually very developmentally normal. And that the perspective taking skills, even though they start in that elementary school kind of developmental phase, that they're still actually maturing into early adulthood. And that kids' worlds are centered around their friends, around their social life, around their schooling, around their sports. So, like, this is like their everyday, this is what they care about, this is what they love. Volunteering actually may feel quite intimidating to them. Like maybe it's something that's super outside of your comfort zone, outside of what you is normal for you. And so it might actually be a little intimidating. And then I think this one really like says a lot about teenagers and even kids who are approaching teenagehood is that they really resist being told what to do. So if you say you should be doing this, most likely they're not going to do it because it's coming from you, and that's always the power struggle. Um, and so what could we do in these situations? Well, again, we're just going to not put ourselves in a punishing position, be curious, kind of normalize the feelings. Then we want to do a little bit of teaching, right? So like um we could say something like I know you care about people, you have strengths in sports and teamwork, and that could really help younger kids in our community. And we can offer them some really like low stakes way of getting engaged. So like, would you want to check out a small opportunity? Like, for example, my son is very invested in soccer. And so, I've shared with him, like, would you want to go teach soccer to younger kids? Or would you want to like teach the kids on our block how to play soccer? Just something that really engages their interests. And then, of course, we want to respect their autonomy because that's so important to teenagers. So, like, let me know I'm here if you want to talk about it. Like, you can choose what works for you. I'm not going to force you. But we're offering them a solution. We're connecting with them, and then we're kind of backing off, right? We don't want to push them too much. So, oh, and this quick strip. So I think I said it before. I'll just repeat it. I know you care about people, even if it doesn't always show. You have so many strengths in sports and teamwork, and those really could help the younger kids in our community. Would you want to check out a short opportunity and see if it feels like a good fit? And you can choose what works for you. So that could be helpful for those older kids. So we are nearing the end of our webinar. It is 7 o'clock. That went by super fast. I really appreciate you all being, so participatory in this time together. Just for my own feedback, I'd love to know if there's anything that resonated for you during this webinar, anything you're going to take back with you. I'm going to keep moving along. But if you wanted to enter something into the chat that really stuck with you, I'd love to know. Helps me to know how I could improve myself for future webinars. But also, any questions that you have, please feel free to enter them into the chat box. So, takeaways, questions, I'll stay for a couple of minutes after to answer them. And then while you're doing that, I'm just going to share just for timing's sake here. And you will all get a copy of this presentation. So you'll have this in your inboxes because you signed up with your email addresses. But I have a list of a few different kind of podcasts that might be interesting to you to really support developing empathy in kids. There's some really great books. So I put a couple of the book titles here, and then if you click on this link, um, that link will also take you to some more recommendations. Um, so I'm just going to scan the chat box here. Okay, Sue, I like examples of different ages at the end and what to let go of. The younger ones are still into themselves, so to speak. Thank you. Sue, I'm so glad that you took that with you because I have to remind myself of doing this all the time. It's not easy work. Um, and so I'm glad that that was a helpful tidbit for you. Um, Okay, Bernice, I love that you had examples and quick response and ideas. We could support culture in the home. Fantastic. Love the rosebud and thorn from Jenny and the emphasis of teaching repair rather than rewarding perfection, punishing imperfection. I'm so glad that those were good takeaways for you. I also just have to share that even though these are things that I try to do, like I have to remind myself on a daily basis of what to do and how to do them. So, um, again, like that concept of perfectionism, like I I'm always trying to do things like differently and better and reminding myself. So, I'm not a model of perfection, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for attending. We have more of these webinars coming up, so wherever you saw a posting, please continue to check in with the New Jersey Family Engagement Hub and SCL4NJ. Um, we do these monthly, so it would be great to see you again. And I appreciate your participation, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. And again, you'll get this presentation in your inbox. So please stay tuned for that.